So as the title suggests, we are doing, I've already forgotten what it is. Ooh, okay. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with a fun book tag. As the title suggests, we are doing the evolution of reading tag, and I was so graciously tagged by the lovely Olivia at Livin' for Books. I will leave her channel down below as well as the original if I can find it, so feel free to check it out there, and all the questions if you'd like to play along in the comments. There's not very many, there's only like 5, I think, and one of them is to tag people. So we're going to be getting just kind of like a chill discussion vibe today. Very short kind of video. I hope you guys enjoy and let me know your answers below. So the first question is to talk about how what you've read changed. So how has your taste in books evolved? And I'm going to be talking primarily focusing on from when I started Booktube to now. I started in 2017 I think is when, no, 2018, the beginning of 2018 is when I like officially started my channel, and it's been that's what 4 or 5 years. I'm really good at math, and so it's been a few years, and in that few years I feel like my tastes in books have drastically changed. I still enjoy what I did back then. I was still reading. When I first started Booktube, I was really reading a lot of YA, a lot of YA fantasy, a lot of the popular things, trying to figure out what I wanted, what I liked. I really liked historical fiction. I liked romance, but I primarily focused on like high school romances and things like that. Some of the YA romances, not very many adult romances, because the ones that I had come across were not like the ones that I read today. They were very like, I don't even have more chick lit than like actual like rom-com stories. So I was starting to, I think, discover that. I had a lot of historical fiction revolving around the Tudors and that time period, which I still really loved. But at the time, I would buy anything, regardless of what it was about, if it mentioned it was set during that time period. So I had a really bad habit of just like buying books. And so I was really, I think, starting out in the YA area, which fine, great. I still really enjoy YA for certain things, so I have no problem with that. But now I would say my change, I read way more romance now than I used to, different types of romances, and I generally read a lot more historical romances as well. Like that's just one shelf. I have 2 entire shelves dedicated to mass market paperbacks, and technically these are all historical romances as well. They're just not in the mass market paperback. So I have 3 shelves that are pretty packed that are dedicated to historical romances. So that's something that I would say within the last couple of years I really started to dive more into. I started diving more into the smutty books. I'd never read anything like that before. Not that I didn't read books that had scenes like that in it, but that wasn't like a genre or subgenre that I even knew was a thing. So discovering that, discovering fantasy romances and things like that, discovering just more like adult content and stuff, and maybe reading books that were a little harder hitting, reading some relatively popular books, finding indie authors. Those are all of the things that I think I gravitate towards now. So I would say I did read romance, but fantasy was my number one. Fantasy and historical fiction were my 2 biggest genres that I read, and right now I would say my biggest genre is romance, and the second one is fantasy. So I would say like I'm definitely discovering authors that have been around for a long time that like I never even gave a chance to. So like, for example, this year and last year I've really discovered like Nora Roberts and how much I really enjoy her writing. And if I saw a book by her before like this year, no, if I had seen a book like by her at the beginning of my YouTube experience, career, whatever you want to call it, I wouldn't have even given it the time of day. And I don't know if there was like why that was. I just like, it was a name that I was like, oh, adult women read that. I don't need that in my life. I'll go read this. And I don't know what the stigma was in my head, but that's, yeah, I would say just like the genres I read and the topics are more adult. Like I tend to read more adult books than YA books, even though I still enjoy a good YA book. And I've discovered manga and graphic novels I hadn't even tried until my first year on Booktube. So there's just some things that like you know, I'm discovering audiobooks. I didn't really start reading audiobooks or listening to audiobooks until I got on Booktube. I didn't have the collection I do that when I started. So like there's a lot of things, but I think just letting myself, instead of thinking like going with what everyone was really interested in reading and reading that, I went with what I was actually personally interested in, and that's just a lot of romance. So the second one, I think I kind of answered this in the last one. The second question is, how has your reading changed? So the format of your reading, that kind of stuff. When I first started, I read only, my entire life, I read only physical books. I rarely read anything that wasn't a physical book. I had really just started getting into like reading ebooks and that kind of thing in college, because it was easy for me to find. Like I took a lot of English classes. I have a creative writing minor, so I took a lot of English classes, and a lot of those had just like your standard novels and things like that that were required as like reading for the class. So I would find ebooks if I couldn't find it physically, but I usually would go for a physical format. Whereas now I primarily read audiobooks. I mean, I do have a lot of physical books and I still enjoy the feel of a book. I still want that, but as far as consuming, it's easier for me just in my lifestyle now to have it on audio. Like that's how I'm going to get through anything. I am the slowest reader in the entire world, and I know that like my stats do not reflect that, and that's because I read primarily on audio. So my very first audiobook was in college. I used it for a class. One of the classes I was taking had a lot of novels that we were reading for it, and I was having a hard time getting through one, so I found an audiobook or someone reading it online, and that kind of, I started an Audible subscription, like one of those like free, like when you kind of can do it for free for a few, like a month, I think. And so I used that to read this book, and I discovered that just made the experience easier. Now, granted, it didn't help that it's a book that I was very much not interested in, so that was a whole thing, but that was my very first audiobook. And so since then, I've kind of dipped in and really kind of gone down the rabbit hole of, now if I can't find an audiobook for something, I have to really want to read it, or I'm going to put it on the back burner until I can find one, just because of how, like, when I'm at work, I have a lot of like time where I am doing things and I can have that going on. I'm really good at multitasking, so I can do my job while I have that in my ear. But then when I get home, I'm not going to read because I want to hang out with my husband because I haven't seen him all day. So my lifestyle doesn't really like let me do physical reading as much as I want to read things. So audiobooks is how I read primarily everything. Not everything, but 9 out of the 10 books I read are going to be somehow connected to an audiobook. The next question, or like section of questions, is about how much you read. So do you read more or less than you have previously? When do you read? Has how often you read changed? Yes. I was a big reader growing up, but I never like, I was always reading something, but I didn't get through things really quickly. So I was always reading, but the number of books I was reading was significantly smaller. So before starting Booktube, and like near the beginning of Booktube and like that kind of time period, like I read a lot when I was younger, but like as far as enjoyment goes, it really started after college, because when I was in college, I wasn't reading very much unless it was during the summer or during like a winter break or something like that. So I did not read a lot. And so when I got out of college, I had like not all this free time, but I had this free time that I could fill with reading, and I'd never done that before. So I would say how much I've read has drastically upticked, especially in the last couple of years. With COVID and 2020 like shutting everything down, a lot of people I know suffered from big reading slumps and couldn't actually read during that time, whereas I had the opposite reaction and I did nothing but read. So that was the first year I ever hit over 100 books. If I hit 50 books in a year, it was like this grand thing. I didn't even think it was possible. So the fact that 100 books was a thing that I hit, and I've constantly hit it since then for the last few years, and the fact that my monthly, like the average amount of books that I read per month has upticked dramatically. It used to be like 5 to 7 books. Now, if I'm reading less than 10, it's considered a quote unquote, not bad month, but a more of a struggle month for me as far as like slumping, just because I'm always reading something. I'm always reading 1 or 2 things. Like if you ever go to my Goodreads, if I have one book, only one book as far as currently reading, it means that I've just finished something else. So like I've always got 2 or 3 books on the go, in different formats and things like that. So yes, I used to read all the time. Like, the fact that like I'm always reading has not changed. It's just I'm getting through things quicker. And that kind of goes back to putting audiobooks in the rotation as well. When do I read? I kind of answered that a little bit with like the audiobook question, but during the day is the biggest time. I read, weirdly enough, I don't read a lot on weekends unless there's like a very specific thing. Like when it's football season, I get a lot done on the weekends because I can have my husband is over and like watching football and I can read and we can be in the same room and hanging out, but I'm reading and not paying attention to the game. And so when it comes to weekends, I would say like that's when I read, but primarily I read during the day throughout the week, Monday to Friday. That's my like, I've always got an audiobook in, or right before bed. Those are my two go-tos. I'm usually reading something before bed. So that used to not be the case. I used to only read when I was at home or right before bed. Usually it was right before bed. But in the last few years, in the last like year or so, it's definitely moved towards during the week is actually when I get most of my reading done. And then has how often you read changed? I would say no, because I'm still like, I'm always reading. Like I'm always in the middle of a book. If I've just finished a book, I'm about to start another one. I don't like not having a book on the go, and I've always been like that. So that part hasn't changed. It's just that I get through things quicker now. So it looks like I'm reading way more, which I am. But as far as that aspect, it's pretty much stayed the same. And then the last real question is, how has Booktube changed you as a reader? I feel like I've kind of answered this sporadically through the last few questions, but it's changed what I'm interested in. It's changed seeing authors for the first time that I would have never discovered, being really aware of what's coming out, because I was never someone who would read the stuff that just got released or the new releases because I didn't never know what was coming out. And I'm still not great at it, but there's like authors that I like, so I follow their works. And so being connected on Booktube and being connected online has really showed me the types of things that I'm interested in. That's changed that a lot. It's changed kind of how I look at the books that I read. I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but like I would read specific things because they were popular and I knew other people are like talking about them, but it wasn't because I was interested in them, but like there were certain things that I might have been interested in, but I steered clear of because they were taboo for one thing or another. Like for example, mass market paperbacks are pretty taboo. Not anymore, but they used to really be. Like the fact that you would just carry them around, it was like a big no. And now I'm like, if there's people on the cover, great, give me more of them. So I think in the last few years, I've really just kind of like let go of how I think people see what I read, and I go for, I'm actually genuinely interested in this book. Does it have smut? Great. The smuttier the better. And I've just kind of accepted that fact about me. And then also just like trying out new things. Like I'm still like, I've read a good chunk of, I've got my manga shelf, it's here. That's why I keep looking over here. But like I have a good chunk of manga books that like I'm genuinely interested in, and I would have never picked up manga without Booktube. I would have maybe never discovered graphic novels, to be honest, without Booktube. And I think it was really good at helping me discover new genres that I had never tried before. Like, for example, sci-fi is still not one that I read a lot of, but I don't think I'd read any sci-fi books before I started YouTube. And now I've got a decent small shelf or so that are dedicated to sci-fi books, and I find things that I like, and I find authors that I like, and I just genuinely go, that book sounds so good, I want to read that book. And I'm not reading it because it's really popular right now. I mean, it may be really popular because like I jumped on the ACOTAR train so quickly. Once I started the book, then I jumped on the ACOTAR train really quickly, and now I'm Sarah J. Maas fan, and that's like a really popular thing to me. And that's fine, but that's because I genuinely like her books, and I'm not worried if like others don't agree with my opinions on that, because like we all have right opinions, but I'm also not worried about the way that people look at me because I read certain things. I'm just like, this is what I'm interested in and this is what I'm enjoying, and if that's not your thing, that's totally fine. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is my attitude towards what I'm reading has changed. And the last question is to tag some people. So I will leave some people down below. I'm gonna have to see who has done this. I don't think a lot of people have done this one. I haven't heard about this one before, but If you would like to do it, then consider yourself tagged if you have a channel, or if not, feel free to leave, like I said, some of the answers down below. The one that I want to know the most is how you think your reading has changed, maybe what you're reading, or the types of genres. Do you read more audiobooks now than you used to, like I do? Like, what is your biggest change that you have seen since, let's say, like within the last 5 to 10 years? I'm very curious. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!